I'm going to do a little quick review of this welding kit I bought off. This came off eBay. It's not a name brand, and it was under $200. It came in this box here, so it goes by the name of u-weld, portable welding cutting outfit. Now, on the box you see a brand new tank, the green and the red. But when I went to get them filled, the only thing I could do around here was get exchanges. So now I have these old tanks, and it's a 10 cubic foot and a 20 cubic foot. Okay, you might also call it a 2 liter and a 4 liter, I think. It costs about from $50 to $60 to get them both exchanged. And the first lesson is, these do not last very long. I thought these were going to last me like the whole year of practicing and once in a while using it. I ended up emptying the tanks out like within 2 days, so I'll talk about that soon. So anyway, the kit came in the box as the nice plastic carrier, the nice hose, the 2 regulators, the torch, and it came with two welding tips. That's a number 2 tip and a number 1 tip, and then it has the cutting attachment there, and that's the manual says it's a number 0 cutting tip, but it's actually a number 1 cutting tip. So that'll cut through like over a ½ inch, maybe 3/4 inch steel. The welding tips are actually a 1 and a 2 is kind of on the light side. You're going to weld the kind of sheet metal. I'm going to show you that too. But basically, the early review, and I'm not an experienced welder, I'm new to this, the adjustment knobs and the torch, I think, are really excellent. The stuff is tight, it adjusts well. The tip, the one thing I had a problem, the only problem I really had that was sort of dangerous, was I didn't have the welding tip tightened in there enough, and it was popping and popping every time I would try to use it. And one time I think I saw a flame come out where the lock nut is. Then I finally caught on that I had to tighten it more. Once I got that done, it worked a lot better. You gotta read all you can about instructions and tips and safety precautions. Read the manual, but basically I think everything was satisfactory to really pretty good. I was slightly disappointed with the regulators. It seemed to me, if I would set the regulator, like say oxygen, to 10, at first it seemed like it was creeping up after that, and the acetylene, if I set it to 3 or 4, it seemed like it creeped up a little more. But then when I opened up the torch, it would drop down and be normal again. But now that I used it a few times, I think that might have gone away, and they're okay. They're really, they're not bad. But there's a lot you have to learn before you start using this stuff. How to keep these always loose, never leave pressure in the regulator. You turn the tank off, and then you release all the pressure. Now, what have I done so far? Well, I used both torch tips and the cutting head, and the problem I ran into where I used all the oxygen and acetylene was I did some cutting, and now I'm going to show you. These are examples of what I cut. You can see I cut pipe, I cut a piece of the exhaust pipe here, I cut off the brackets from the muffler, some more cutting. All that was pretty much enough to empty out the tanks. But this is when I wasn't using it efficiently, and I started cutting and it would stop, and then I had to heat it up again and then add the oxygen, start cutting. So I'm just saying maybe an hour to 2 of real use is going to empty those tanks out. So then I went to the welding tips, and these are my first demonstrations here. And I started off with some nails. These are like a cement nail. It's just basic steel. And then these are your basic nickel plated common nails. So the first example, with even the small welding tip, is enough to burn off a nail before you know it. It'll start melting, and then if you don't pull the torch away, it's just going to burn the tip right off. But if you start getting a little careful with the heavier metal here, it was fine. This one I was very delicate with, and I got it okay. This one again, I did like a fusion weld, and then finally it cut off the end. This time I put 3 nails together for a little heavier, and I was able to do a deeper weld without burning it off. And then these were heavier nails yet. Now, then I went to rebar. This is 1/2-inch rebar. This is actually too heavy for a number 1 or number 2 torch tip. I took the number 2 tip and I kind of ran it in turbo mode, where I set the standard flame and then I added more acetylene and then I added more oxygen, and it was able to do a pretty nice weld over here. But these torch tips are really good for something like this. This is 3/32 sheet metal, and you're not going to be able to see it, but this is the number 1 tip. It's a very thin fusion weld and fairly thin weld. And then over here I used the number 2 tip. It was a little bit better. There's a little broader fusion weld. Then I used a wire. They might call it baling wire. Then I used a wire hanger, and then I used the FG45 welding rod, which is 3/32, and that's the most common welding rod I think for gas welding. And 3/32 welding rod is about the same width diameter. The diameter is about the same as the thickness of this. So this is great to use for that torch. Stuff like this is really, you need a larger welding tip to do this kind of stuff, unless you really pump up the pressures, or open up the valves. And little things like nails, it's just going to cut them apart. And as I said, the cutting tip, you'll use up the gas and the oxygen really fast, especially if you're not using the torch properly. And finally, I would say, so what I do now is every time I use it, I mark the pressure on the tanks on paper before I start. I'll do a little job, I'll stop, and then I'll check how much the tank went down. And then the next day I come out and do it again. And I found that the acetylene tank seems to recover some pressure after resting, but not the oxygen. So that's it. I really think this little kit is great. The regulators are fine, and I don't think they're that great, but they're okay. They're workable. Just be careful with them. Make sure stuff is tight. The hoses are great. The torch is fine. Everything is really impressive. There's the tip cleaners, the striker, the wrench. For that price, great way to go. So this is my second set of tanks, and they're almost empty, and it's exchange. And don't expect to keep the nice shiny tanks you get. I don't know where they go. Alright, that's about it for now.